This is the Germans from Russia Experience, Episode 20, Murder Mystery near Fresno's Rooshiantown in 1896, Part 7. Welcome to the Germans from Russia Experience. I am the creator and your host, Elisa Lung Rodriguez, and I am here to inspire you and others to learn anything and everything about your own family heritage by providing information, experiences, and stories about a special group of people, the Germans from Russia. Hello. I hope you're having a great week. As we are approaching summertime, I also hope that you have lots of plans to visit family and ask questions and share stories about your ancestors. Please remember that a story about your family does not need to have all of the details that you would find in a published work. A story can be 1 or 2 sentences long, such as, "My dad named his first car, a 1949 Plymouth, the Baby Whale. Later, when he was a truck driver, he used the handle Whale." This is all that it needs to be. Short and sweet. It tells something about your ancestor, something unique, something individual, and sometimes something enduring enough to get a tattoo of a whale on your leg. Go out and start collecting those stories. So, back to the murder of the 3 Armenians. I must assume you have been listening all along, or you would not be listening to part 7 of a story. But again, the reason I am telling this story began when I was researching the lives and family of Reverend Jacob Legler, who was the first pastor of the new Evangelical Lutheran Cross Church. This church was the first Volga German church in Fresno. It was founded in 1891, and the first church building was erected in 1895. In my research, I was looking through newspapers.com, and an article came up about this murder in which Jacob Legler's name was in, so on and so on. And since I am already interested in true crime stories, it did not take much for me to continue reading while sitting on the edge of my seat. I have to admit that when I started reading the articles, I thought the killer or killers would be identified quite quickly. But who am I kidding? Didn't I say I was interested in true crime? And that I listened to a lot of true crime stories, including historical true crime? I should have been equally aware that the murder or murderers would not be found. Do I need to list the reasons? It was 1896 after all. The list is quite long as to the tools that we now have access to that we didn't have then. So on we go. And to remind you and myself, I created family trees for the Shahamarians and their daughters and granddaughters who married the names Nishkin, Soroyan, Paul, and Dunn, in hopes that I would find living relations to provide to them the research that I have found, that is, if they were interested, of course. And how amazing would it be to speak to someone, a living person from one of these families over 100 years later, to ask how it may have continued to affect their family. Because it must have. There's this thing called generational trauma. And with that, the bits that I'm going to read today will be more about those that continue to live on after this tragedy. I will resume reading articles from Friday, June 26th, 1896. So this is 20 days after the murder. The Fresno Weekly Republican. The triple murder. The officers working quietly on different clues. The authorities are still working quietly to penetrate the mystery of the triple murder of the Armenian family, 2 miles south of town nearly 3 weeks ago. A clue has been discovered, and although it cannot be published, it furnishes as good a motive for the deed as that of the Russian theory. The Armenians are assisting in the investigation, as they are determined to bring the criminals to justice. As the matter now stands, the murderer or murderers are unknown, but the different clues are being followed. Sunday, June 28th, 1896, the San Francisco Examiner. Last of the Shahamarians. Fresno, June 27th. T.C. White, one of the directors of the First National Bank, was today appointed guardian of the person and estate of Esther Shahamarian, now an inmate of the Stockton Asylum. She is the only survivor of the Shahamarian family recently murdered near this city. The estate is valued at $2,000. The girl is hopelessly insane. Okay, next we have the Sacramento Union, Monday, June 29th. Want to administer 4 applicants made on the Shahamarian estate. Fresno, June 28th. There are 4 applications for letters of administration on the estate of Stephen Shahamarian, the Armenian who was assassinated several weeks ago, together with his son and daughter. 1 application on file is by the trustees of the Stockton Insane Asylum, of which a daughter of Shahamarian's is an inmate. Another is by Jacob Shahamarian, a brother of the deceased, and a third by the public administrator, L. H. Church. The 4th is by T. A. Bell, a real estate agent of this city, who asks to be appointed for the reason that the friends of the insane daughter, who is the only living heir, want him to act as administrator of the estate. The property is valued at $2,500. The Expositor, Wednesday, July 1st, 1896. More about the Shahamarians. Coroner Long adheres to his original opinion. Confident that the old man killed his children and himself, Sheriff Scott and other officials disagree with him. The criminal authorities are still working on the Shahamarian murder case, and one official declares that he knows the guilty person, but cannot make a case against him. The friends of the slaughtered father, daughter, and son have not yet lost interest in the tragedy and still hope to bring the murderer to justice. Coroner Long adheres to his original theory that the father killed his 2 children and then himself. He has closely investigated the mysterious case and has discovered no circumstances tending to shake his belief. He thinks the revolver with which the triple crime was committed was stolen before any official reached the Mukes vineyard, the scene of the sanguinary occurrence. Now, I guess forensics wasn't anywhere near what it is these days, but to take a gun from a murder scene, steal it, what if you were then found with it? How would that be explained? What was that about? I can't imagine someone stealing the gun, because then they could be looked at as the murderer. Unless they were hiding it. The coroner thinks that a peculiar powder mark upon the index finger of the old man's right hand goes to prove that shortly before his death he had discharged a revolver, and includes to the theory that the bullet which pierced the elder Shahamarian's cheekbone before it crashed into his brain was aimed at the eye. That the Shahamarian family was tainted with insanity is well known, and it is not at all unlikely that the old man suddenly became determined to kill both his children and himself. Coroner Long is certain that all 3 of the murdered persons went voluntarily to the spot where they met death, and that they were neither forced nor decoyed to the fatal vineyard. And again, how the heck did they get there? If it was in the middle of the night, it was dark. how did they get there? If they took themselves there, I think I said this before, wouldn't their wagon be there or the horses that they rode over on? Nothing in any of these articles had said anything about transportation. And I just always keep wondering about that. Sheriff Scott does not share Dr. Long's belief. I wish it were so, he said a day or two ago. If the facts justified such a theory, my mind would be much easier. But I am certain that the Shahamarians were foully murdered, and I am confident that sooner or later the assassin will be captured. District Attorney Snow, when interviewed, said that he had not lost sight of the case and believed that before long he would have the pleasure of prosecuting the cruel murderer. Constables Dumas, Shaw, and Croucher take little stock in the suicide theory and say that while evidence sufficient to warrant arrests is lacking, they are certain that before many months the assassin will have been captured. Okay, the expositor for Wednesday, July 1st, 1896. A guardian appointed. The case of the insane Shahamarian girl. T.C. White was Saturday appointed guardian of the person and estate of Esther Shahamarian, whose father was recently murdered near Fresno. Mr. White was appointed upon motion of Lewis H. Smith, who appeared as attorney for the trustees of the State Asylum for the Insane at Stockton, where the young woman is confined. The estate is valued at $2,000. Okay, the San Francisco Call-and-Post for Friday, July 3rd. Fresno's murder mystery. New evidence and theories in the Shahamarian tragedy. Fresno, California, July 2nd. New evidence has come to light which has induced many people to believe that the recent Shahamarian murders were committed by the father, who then killed himself. It is well known that insanity ran in the family, and previous to the murder, the old man had shown signs of being crazy. Coroner Long is certain the father killed the two children and then himself. There was a peculiar powder mark on the index finger of the old man, which showed that he must have discharged the revolver just before his death. Now, I'm wondering if, as described in many of the other articles, that they feel like Stephen maybe put his hands up to his face, that powder burn could have come from that, as he was shot right in the face, in his cheekbone close to his eye socket. So if he put his hands up, I don't see, and it was close range, I'm feeling like that's where the powder burn could have come from. I don't know how it would be any different if his hand was behind the barrel of the gun, right? If he was shooting it, his hand would be behind the barrel of the gun. I realize the gunpowder shoots out in all directions probably, but all right, continue. The expositor for Wednesday, July 8th. These articles are getting shorter and shorter, by the way, as you have noticed. Superior Court. A guardian appointed for Esther Shahamarian. Judge Carter, Wednesday, appointed as guardian of the person and estate of Esther Shahamarian, an incompetent person, J.M. Seropian, whose bond was fixed at $3,000. The young woman, who is the sole survivor of the murdered Shahamarian family, is the writing or the printing is really bad here. Oh, it's confined in the Stockton Asylum for the Insane. Okay, the Seropian family. When I did the history of Fresno and talked about the Armenians that came here, the Seropians were some of the first Armenian family to come to Fresno. This doesn't indicate what the connection was. I mean, at the least, they probably went to the same church, maybe. I don't know. I don't know what this is all about, him having, desire to take care of her, but that's on there. Here it says also, John Seropian has been appointed by Judge Risley, administrator of the estate of Stephen Shahamarian, who was the son and daughter were assassinated near the city last June. Now, this is all the way in August from the expositor, that little snippet. August. This one is the same. The new grand jury. Okay, this is the expositor. And this is Tuesday, October 20th, 1896. So, June, July, August, September, October, 4 months after the murder. Now, there's a list of who the grand jury members were. There's it looks like 20 names here. And then the part that involves this case says, among the grave matters likely to engage the attention of the grand jury is the murder of Shahamarian family last May, it says. A crime which remains a blot on the reputation of the county and which has only been superficially investigated. Now, I don't know who wrote that, but I guess if it's not solved, maybe that's how the way they're using it. Okay. Then in December, in the expositor, there's another short statement about the estate of Stephen Shahamarian. The administrator, John M. Seropian, cited to appear and show cause why his letters should not be revoked because of neglect of his duties. Oh. He shows that he has pursued proper diligence in setting up the affairs of the estate. So again, no specific details, but something's not going correctly. The expositor, Tuesday, December 22nd, 1896. The following business was transacted by Superior Court, and there are things that don't apply to us. And then here, estate of Shahamarian, sale of personal property by the public administrator approved. So things are getting sold. The Fresno Morning Republican, Thursday, April 1st, 1897. So this is 10 months later. Order to show cause. In the Superior Court of the County of Fresno, State of California, in the matter of the estate of Stephen Shahamarian, deceased. Okay, here he is again. John M. Seropian, the administrator of the estate of Stephen Shahamarian, deceased, having filed his petition hereby duly verified, praying for an order of sale at private sale of the whole of the real estate and said descendant for the purpose therein set forth. Wow. It is therefore ordered by this court that all persons interested in said estate of said deceased be and appear before the Superior Court of the County of Fresno in Department 1 thereof on Monday, the 31st day of May, 1897. So they're giving a 2-month notice here at 2:00 in the afternoon of said day at the courtroom of Department 1 of said Superior Court, the courthouse in the city of Fresno, in said county of Fresno, state of California, then and there to show cause, if any they have, why an order should not be granted and made by said court, and authorizing the said administrator to sell the whole or so much of the real estate of said deceased at private sale or public auction, as to the court shall seem for the best interest of said estate, and as shall be necessary or proper, and that a copy of this order be published at least 1 week for 4 consecutive weeks in the Fresno Morning Republican, a newspaper printed and published in the city of Fresno in said county of Fresno, dated March 31st, 1897. E. W. Risley, Judge of the Superior Court. Carter and Smith, Attorneys for Administration. Okay, so that was supposed to end at the end of May. There was nothing through the summer that I could find. Fresno Morning Republican, Saturday, November 27th, 1897. So nearly a year and a half later. The Shahamarian Estate. John M. Seropian, administrator of the estate of Stephen Shahamarian, asks that the residue of the estate amounting to $347 be given to the only lawful heir, Esther Shahamarian. The total proceeds received from the sale of the estate amounted to $992, and the expenditures were $619. Shahamarian and his son and daughter were murdered in June of 1896, and the mysteries surrounding their death has not yet been cleared up. Okay, I went back to newspapers many times, and I looked for more or any kind of resolution, explanation about what happened in this case. And the next thing that came up was in 1899, which is 3 years after the murder, in the Fresno Morning Republican. The Nishkins are having a big banquet, and it tells who's coming and what they had, a fine dinner, and so on. So people are continuing to live their lives along, as time passes. This was super interesting. 1905 is the next article. I'm not finding, in the meantime, I'm not finding like obituaries for any of the people named in this mystery, those who were still living at the time. I haven't found any obituaries or any other details until 1905, Tuesday, January 24th. And this is a notice to the public. It's very short. It says, on and after January 21st, 1905, I will not be responsible for any debts contracted by my wife, Mrs. K. H. Nishkin, she having left my bed and board. And that is K. M. Nishkin. That's Kalem Hagop, the husband of Armin. So this is about Armin. So in 1905, they either separated or maybe divorced, is what I thought, although I couldn't find any other articles about that. And he says he's not responsible for her, so having left his bed and so on. Now, these are the two that I took pictures of their headstones. I have that on my Facebook page, and it has their little pictures there. Okay, so in 1905, they were separated. This little snippet of an article made me think about how things might be talked about in this day and age on social media. Some families might put their dirty laundry out like that on social media. But in these days that we're reading these articles from, it was customary to put their social business in the newspaper. And so that's why we see something like that. It doesn't appear to be any kind of a court filing. It's just a declaration that he's not responsible for his wife. All right, so that was 1905. Well, in 1907, Reverend Jacob Legler dies, and he passed of cancer. In his obituary, it says he died of cancer. There was no mention of this case or any kind of trouble that he was privy to. And 2 years later, his wife died. And this is just 11 and 13 years after the murder. So I can imagine that they probably, of course, being, a pastor himself, anybody who's killed, I think you would feel some kind of feelings for the family who was left behind, and, the murder that was never solved. And so I'm sure that, as a pastor, as a leader of a church, that, he must have had some feelings about that. Of course, I realize it is possible that he or his people took the lives of these people, but I don't know that for sure. So I'm only thinking of, the scenario where people are caring about each other. All right, then in the Fresno Morning Republican, there's an advertisement here in 1908. So the year after Legler was passed away. And this is for the Nishkian. This is Armin's husband, Kalem, and he has a bicycle shop down on Tulare Street. It says, juvenile bicycles arrive. We are glad to announce the arrival of a large shipment of juvenile wheels, the strongest and easiest riding bicycle ever shown in Fresno. Bicycles that were constructed for boys and girls who give them hard usage, built to stand every strain. each wheel equipped with best hangers and tires. I don't know what hangers are on wheels. I have no idea. $25 wheel is now $20, it says. There's a savings of from $5 to $10 on each wheel. Interesting. Nishkin Cyclery. And the address is 1823 Tulare Street, and the phone main is 939. So way back in the time where we only had 3 digits to dial a phone number. Quite interesting. All right. This is now jumping to 1912. 1912. And this says, notice to creditors in the Superior Court of the County of Fresno, State of California, the matter of the estate of Jacob Shahamarian, deceased. So, of course, I went back to see, well, was there an obituary for Jacob? Now, Jacob is Stephen's brother, and Jacob is the father of Elijah and Daniel. This says, notice is hereby given by the undersigned Elijah Shahamarian, administrator of the estate of Jacob Shahamarian, deceased, to the creditors and all persons having claims against said deceased, to exhibit them with the necessary vouchers within 4 months after the first publication of this notice, to said administrator at the office of M. B. Harris and E. M. Harris in the First National Bank Building in the city of Fresno, Fresno County, State of California, the same being the place for the transaction of business of said estate in the County of Fresno, State of California. Dated July 8th, 1912, Elijah Shahamarian, administrator of the estate of Jacob Shahamarian, deceased, M. B. Harris and E. M. Harris, attorneys for administrator. Okay, then we jump to 1919, and this was 7 years after Jacob dies. His wife dies, Nazik, and this is the mother of Daniel and Eli. Mrs. Shahamarian, influenza victim. Influenza yesterday caused the death of Mrs. Nazik Shahamarian, one of the pioneers of the Armenian colony here. She was 63 years old and had lived in this city 30 years. She came here with her husband, 2 sons, and a daughter to join her oldest daughter, Mrs. B. H. Paul. She is survived by her sons, Eli and Daniel, and her daughter, Mrs. K. H. Nishkin. One of her granddaughters is Mrs. Florence Longworthy of Berkeley. 2 grandsons served with the colors of the United States, both actually taking part in battles. These young men are Lieutenant Irvin Paul of the 116th Engineers and Edward H. Paul of the 41st Air Squadron. The funeral arrangements are being made by Stevens and Bean, but the date for the burial has not been set. This is 2 days later, the Fresno Morning Republican, January 7th, 1919. To hold funeral service. Funeral services for Nazik Shahamarian, who died on Saturday, age 63 years, will be held at the Armenian Presbyterian Church this afternoon at 2 o'clock. Interment to take place at Ararat Cemetery. And then there's an announcement for her land being transferred to Elijah. And 1919, also Daniel has some land that he's selling to A.B. Bopp in the German edition, and that's where they all lived there. And some land being sold to a Catherine Schwabenland in the German edition, $500. And to George Schmidt, another section being sold in the German edition. So Daniel and Eli are selling off the land that they own, and it's because they moved to the Bay Area. The next few articles will mention that they're from the Bay Area. So this one now, 1925, We go back to Kalem Hagop, the one who 20 years ago put his wife out and said, or she put herself out of the bed, I guess, and he said, I'm not paying for any of her debts. That would be Armin, Daniel and Eli's sister. But Nishkin, Kalem Hagop, dies at age 44. It says photographer dealer dies from poisoning, lived here since 1888. So, yes, he had a bike shop and he also had this phonograph shop. It says, K.M. Nishkin, 44, a phonograph dealer of Fresno and resident of this country since August 18, 1888, died today in his home, 641 Dudley Avenue, from toxic poisoning. He is survived by his wife, Mrs. Armin Dulhi Nishkin, two daughters, Doris and Neoma Nishkin, his father, H.M. Nishkin, all of Fresno, a brother, Leon Nishkin, of San Francisco, and a large number of other relatives living in this country. He was born February 11th, 1881, in Armenia, and came to Fresno County with his parents as a child of 6. The family resided first in Scandinavian colony. When he was 17, Nishkin went into business for himself, opening a small bike shop. Later on, he went into the phonograph business on a large scale and finally discontinued the bicycle business and leased the store at 1046 Broadway, where he has conducted his business for a number of years. Funeral services will be arranged by Stevens and Bean. Okay, poisoning, toxic poisoning. There's no mention of any kind of possible homicide at all. So what could this toxic poisoning be? Okay, so the next day, there's another article in the Fresno Morning Republican. There's a photograph of him. I think this is the same picture that's on his headstone. So Saturday, June 20th, 1925, K.H. Nishkin dies, age 44, resided in Fresno for 37 years. Kalem H. Nishkin, 44, phonograph store proprietor at 1046 Broadway, died early yesterday morning at his home, 641 Dudley Avenue, after an illness of about 2 weeks, during which he had been confined to bed. He was born in Armenia, February 11th, 1881, and came to Fresno when he was but 7 years old, first making his home with his parents in Scandinavian colony. Nishkin had been in business for the last 27 years, first starting with a small bicycle shop on Tulare Street. He had maintained his place of business on Broadway for the last 8 years, having previously conducted a bicycle and phonograph store adjoining the old Kuttner building, destroyed by fire. The widow, Mrs. Armenulhi Nishkin, two daughters, Doris and Neoma Nishkin, his father, H.M. Nishkin, and brother Leon Nishkin of San Francisco, survive him. Funeral arrangements are being made by Stevens and Bean and will be announced later. June 21st, 1925. And this is again the same information. The funeral will be at 9 o'clock at the Holy Trinity Armenian Church, and the internment at the Ararat Cemetery. And again, I have pictures of that on my Facebook page. So the next year in the Fresno Morning Republican, we have on March 14th, 1926, former Fresnon is buried at Berkeley. Mrs. K.H. Nishkin of 641 Dudley Avenue and her daughters, Neoma and Doris, returned yesterday from Berkeley, where they attended the funeral of Mrs. Florence Langworthy, formerly of Fresno, who was run over and killed by an automobile in the Bay City last week. So this Mrs. Langworthy is Florence Paul, and she is the daughter of the oldest daughter of Jacob and Nazik. So Daniel's oldest sister, which I never found her first name, but this is her daughter, Florence Paul. And it says Mrs. Langworthy is survived by her father, B.H. Paul, 2 uncles, Eli and Daniel Shahamarian, all of Fresno. Okay, they're still in Fresno, 1925. And Reverend Irvin Paul of San Diego. Mrs. Nishkin is the aunt of Mrs. Langworthy. All right, I thought that was interesting because she was run over by a car. I mean, I guess it happened, but they just wrote that stuff there. Okay, the next year, 1927, Fresno Morning Republican, Shahamarian in Alameda. So like I said, they went up to the Bay Area, Eli and Daniel. August 19th, 1927, Dan H. Shahamarian, beloved brother of Eli Shahamarian, and Mrs. K.H. Nishkin of Fresno, a native of Armenia, aged 50 years old, 3 months and 4 days. Friends are invited to attend the funeral service Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock from the Chapel of Stevens and Bean, Morticians at 1405 Broadway. So Daniel has died in 1927. Funeral services set for Fresno box maker. Last rites for Dan H. Shahamarian, 50, retired Fresno box manufacturer, who died last Friday in Alameda, who will be observed Tuesday at 10 a.m. at Stevens and Bean Chapel. Place of interment will be announced later. Shahamarian was a native of Armenia and had resided in Fresno for the last 37 years. He is survived by a sister, Mrs. K.H. Nishkin, and a brother, Eli Shahamarian, both of Fresno. Now, I do know that he is buried near his uncle, Stephen, and Queen and Benjamin, because I've seen Dan's grave. And Eli's is there, too. And I've already shared pictures of them, those graves and headstones. All right. The next day, of course, it is announcing again, and it does say that he'll be buried at the Ararat Cemetery, 50 years old. Here's another one announcing the burial of Stephen. And then here is the article that describes what have happened to him. So Tuesday, August 23rd, 1927, former Fresno fireman dies. First we've heard of this. Daniel Shahamarian, 50, a resident of Fresno for many years and a member of the Fresno Fire Department when horses furnished motive power, died in an Alameda sanitarium Friday following a lingering illness. Now, a sanitarium in 1927 was most likely a tuberculosis hospital. Don't know that 100% for sure, but from the history that I've read, that's what they called those tuberculosis hospitals. They called them sanitariums. And the Bay Area was a popular place for that because the cool air, and in the Bay Area it's much cooler in California, the cool air was said to be therapy for people with tuberculosis. So Shahamarian was a native of Armenia and came to America in 1890. Okay, there's the date that Dan actually came, and from what I told you before, I could not find records of him entering the country as a child with his family, and I went back after I saw this and I looked for it again, and I can't find any kind of a ship record or any kind of an immigration record that has his name. He joined the fire department as a call man in 1906. So that was 10 years after the murders, after having been employed by other agencies. Later, he was placed on the extra list at Engine 1, which at the time was located on Fulton Street between Merced and Fresno Streets, about opposite Cooper's store. During the period that he was on the department, according to Von Sobogian, a mechanic of the present departments, and an intimate friend of Shahamaryan's during the latter's residence in Fresno. The department fought fires in the Palo Alto stables located where the Hotel Fresno stands now, and the Black Hawk stables on the site of the present Holland building. Okay, so stable fires were really significant in those days. I assume they're talking about horse stables. I mean, that was, the main mode of transportation, if you could get it, having horses and wagons and whatnot. So those were really important places. But why so many fires in stables? After a short period with the department, he was employed by Archelian Brothers as a box maker, a trade which he followed until 2 years when he became inactive because of ill health. Funeral services will be held this morning at 10 o'clock at the Stevens and Bean Chapel, with burial following in Ararat Cemetery. Shahamaryan is survived by a brother, Eli, and a sister, Mrs. K.H. Nishkin, that's Armin, at whose home at 641 Dudley Avenue is resided prior to Alameda recently. Okay, so he only recently went up to Alameda. Maybe it was for the sanitarium that he went up there. Dan Shahamaryan, 50, laid to rest in Fresno. Funeral services for Dan Shahamaryan, 50, formerly a member of the Fresno Fire Department, were held yesterday at the Chapel of Stevens and Beans, followed by burial at Ararat Cemetery. He died last Friday in an Alameda sanitarium. Shahamaryan became a member of the Fresno Fire Department in 1906 and was later employed by Archelian Brothers as a box maker. He was a native of Armenia, coming to America in 1890. Okay, a lot of repeating stuff. But there's no mention of the murders of his uncle and cousins. No mention of any of that in any of these articles I found. Okay, that was 1927. Now Eli, or Daniel's passed, and now we're back to some other people that were mentioned in this murder mystery, the Brandenburgs. In 1928, Louise Brandenburg died, and in 1935, Albert Brandenburg dies. I was not able to find obituaries for either one of them. There is a find a grave listing that says they're buried at Mountain View Cemetery, but there's no photo of the headstone and there's no other information attached. So I don't know where they're buried there. I would have to go to the cemetery office and look those up. So that brings us to 1935? 1935, yeah, Albert Brandenburg died. Okay, so the Brandenburgs are gone. The Leglers are gone. Daniel's gone. And now in 1947, Eli Shahamaryan dies in Bay City. So he must have stayed up in the San Francisco area. And he died. All the same kind of information is here. It doesn't give a reason why he died, but he was 75. So 20 years he lived after his brother Daniel. And he's buried side by side next to Daniel, right there near Stephen, Queen, and Benjamin. Jacob Jr., who was also one of the main characters, witnesses mentioned in the early articles, he was one of the people who worked in Hollister with Albert Brandenburg, and he passes away in 1940 before Eli did. So, guys, after that, we kind of jump off a cliff. There's nothing else about any of these families. There's no mentions of this in any more articles that I could find. And so that's where we're going to have to end it. Before I found this story, I had collected dozens of newspaper articles concerning the descendants of Jacob Legler. Now, he and his wife had 10 children. In my research, creating the family trees and whatnot, I found that several of the children, mainly the boys, did not ever marry. Like 3 or 4 of them never married. One of the young gentlemen, sons of Jacob Legler, had taken his own life in his early 20s. Others had failed marriages. One particular had 3 or 4 failed marriages. And there seemed to be some domestic violence among some of the Legler men as well. There were many traumas and tragedies that came down in the generations. And even some living descendants today that I've found in newspapers and whatnot seem to be struggling with mental health. I have read books about generational trauma and how anything, good or bad, that our ancestors went through lives in us. It's in our DNA, whether we know about it or not. So early on, I was thinking that the trauma came from the old country, where life was very hard, and many of our people fled for their lives. I became emotional at times, thinking that I wonder if they know. I wonder if the living descendants of these people know what their ancestors endured. If they're struggling with their own mental health and don't even know why. Because the more anyone knows about their ancestors, the more they can understand about themselves, good or bad. There's been studies done on this, where even if you know, say, bad things about your family, like things like this, like murder or, trauma or abuse, it is important to understand where we come from, good or bad. There is no concrete resolution to the telling of the murder of Stephen, Benjamin, and Queen Shahamarian. The newspaper articles just stopped. The investigation just stopped. The talking among the Rooshians just stopped. I do not know what happened. I recently asked my oldest living relative, Richard, a first cousin of my grandfather, who is 93 years old now, if he remembers a time that the Germans from Russia talked in any way against the Armenian people or vice versa. He could not recall any such talk. I asked another cousin, 82 years old, and she told me that she could not remember any such talk either. So I think that's a good thing, as if these two cultures of people struggled to understand one another 125 years ago, that has not continued to carry over all this time. Because it certainly could have. There are groups of people that hate on each other now, and they truly do not even know why. I hope this is provoking thought for you. I sure would like to hear what you're thinking about all this. Has this story inspired you to start researching in newspapers? Ask for family stories. Think about what your ancestors went through. Think about other groups of people in a different way. Please share your thoughts. I'd love to get conversations going about any ideas that occur to you from this subject. Well, there's episode 20. I really would like to continue the podcast. However, I need input and ideas and support. My favorite episodes so far are those where I included other voices. I would like to do more of that. I may be taking a bit of a break here. I have no idea how long I might be offline, but I really do want to continue this. And in the meantime, get to work on your own research. There are more tools out there than ever before, and it's so much easier than ever before. Get started today. Thank you for listening to the Germans from Russia experience. I hope that something you heard today will inspire you to learn anything and everything you can about your ancestors. If you like what you heard, please leave a review, like and share this podcast. You can comment directly by emailing me at thegermansfromrussiaexp@gmail.com. Also, like my Facebook page, The Germans from Russia Experience Podcast. Please see my show notes in previous episodes for website suggestions to begin or continue your discovery of your Germans from Russia roots. And about this episode, my podcast artwork is by Matt Wall. I receive technical assistance from my friend Annie Anderson.